created an infrastructure from nothing that allows them to advance their strategy throughout the Middle East and competition with others, obviously. And so the net sum of this race to leverage these economics of the city is thousands of competing strategies that result in this global outcome. A growing global city, very different than our traditional image of a city, that's a chaotic system, fast-growing, unplanned, and an extractive system from an ecological point of view. Here it is spread out on a map so you can see it. And as Conrad has reviewed for us, we're still in the middle of developing this system. We're kind of halfway there. So give us till 2050 when 70% of the world's people are living in cities. And we've got a period of time to think, how do we develop our strategy as those who want to shape this global system? Because my talk is about scenarios. How do we create a strategy that actually makes this an ecological system for us? During the course of the development of this global system, what I've called the urban revolution, what the city is itself has changed. So we still have conversations about the city as a jurisdiction, and I think one of the challenges to INICLI is we work through thinking about the city as a jurisdiction, that it isn't any longer. This is something much bigger than something that's governed within a jurisdiction any longer. Through the period that INICLI has grown, the main category is actually some kind of metropolitan area for which there, in many cases, is no real functioning jurisdiction. There's attempts to negotiate jurisdiction, but the metro becomes a very unruly process where different jurisdictions compete against one another, and they have different plans, and the outcomes are very unpredictable. But now we're into a different phase where the system itself is continental or regional or even global. And so what you see, because this system here, called North America, this urban system, the United States, 83% of people living in urban areas by 2050, close to 90% living in urban areas. If there's one event, I hope you can see the little red circle there by New Orleans, one event in one part of that system shuts massive amounts of activity in that system down. Why? Why does it happen? Because it's an integrated system. It's an urban system in which all of these economies and their strategies within them are functioning together in some kind of way we still don't really understand. And the scholars who study this, they study globalization and the global city, they have argued that there's some kind of structure to this thing. And so you see a consulting industry probably knocking on your doors these days to talk with you about how you can move from being a gamma city to a beta city, because there's this hierarchy of cities in the world, and it all seems rather tidy the way they describe it. But I think if you look at the data of how this system works, now this is an image of the interactions between a certain research community in Europe, within the cities of Europe. If you look at the data of any of the things we do within the system, it's highly chaotic, highly unruly, very evolutionary, so that I've put little red boxes again. There's constantly change, so the rectangular box, there's dense interactions forming there, and before you know it, that's the center, the nodes of that system will shift. Or even the little red dot here at the extremity, something exciting can be discovered there, and before you know it, the balance of gravity within this system is going to change. So we don't have a tidy system here. We have something very messy. It's nothing like the world is flat and we're all becoming the same. And so the question is, well, let me give an example, actually. I was going to the question, but let me give a sense of the chaoticness of it. So here's an emerging regional urban system in East Asia. So we see part of Japan here and South Korea. There's North Korea, very interesting, and here's China, urbanizing China, Taiwan. And here's an area called the Pearl River Delta with Hong Kong and a bunch of other big cities. And it's a very interesting system there that has an impact upon the world because it has unique conditions in it. One thing unique about the Pearl River Delta is that agriculture and urban growth are cheek and jowl with one another. So agriculture insinuates into the city, and the city is stretching into agriculture. So it's very unique to the urban form in that region. And one of the outcomes of that is that in the live animal markets, which is part of the culture of eating there and buying, you can find hundreds of exotic species in cages like this in live markets. People coming in from rural areas, in and out of the city all the time, trading these things. So the transmission of viruses between all these species in this dense proximate area is very intense. This is the global center of virus incubation, and we're going to hear more about that from Professor Bloom. To give you a sense, when they raided these markets around the SARS crisis, 15,000 animal markets with 70,000 and 70,000 hotels where they found animals in cages like this, live animals. And then you build it in this dense way, in a humid climate with very little air circulation. Before you know it, you've created the conditions for the transmission of viruses. And you get massive migrations of people back to the village, down to Hong Kong, to business travels around the world. Before you know it, you get an event called SARS that has a dramatic impact, 30% reduction in global travel and tourism in a one-year period of time. And if you look at this data, if you could see it, if you go to WHO website, you don't hear this data by city, you hear it by country. So we're still living in a world as if all these things happen country to country, when in fact it's emerging within unique conditions of an emerging chaotic system. It's changing the nature of nature. In the United States, in a 10-year, 11-year period of time, the land area of Florida was converted into an urban land area. That's the rate at which it's growing. In 30 to 40 years, at current rates of urban expansion, we will increase the amount of urbanized land area in the world by three times. 3 times what we've got today at the pace and in the way that we do it. Think of the habitat that is eliminating as we go, the coastline that is changing. The extraction of resources. So concrete is just the most concrete one we can talk about when we think about cities. Annually, the concrete for our cities is equivalent to 8 times the global fleet of automobiles. So the extractive dimensions, and we have it north of us here in the tar sands as well, the extractive dimensions are enormous, in this case accounting for 5% of global emissions of greenhouse gases. That's equivalent to Russia, just for the concrete for our growing cities. The United States, I mentioned it as an emerging national continental urban system. We can begin to understand the intensity of activity within what Richard Florida calls megaregions. Those megaregions are only a point in time. In 10 years, it'll be something very different than that. So we're not going to settle on megaregions, but you can see in the New York or the eastern seaboard from Washington up to Boston, you can see here, this is the light footprint at night of the area, and now this measures the human interactions, the intensity of interactions, and the amount of urban land conversion happening within that area. So that's one way to look at the world of cities as it is emerging. And of course, there's a direct correlation with all kinds of environmental outcomes. This shows the geographic point source of greenhouse gases in the United States, and it's obviously very equivalent with that new urban terrain that's emerging. So the question that comes, and it was the main question I want to explore in my book, is what's our strategy for this? How do we begin to shape it? How can we stand here as ICLEI people saying we're going to be more sustainable when it's become this huge and this chaotic? And for me, there were 2 questions. One is the question on the mind of the urban migrant or the company or the municipality that wants to have competitive position in the world. How do I as a city, someone asked me over breakfast this morning, how do I build some stable advantage for myself in this new emerging global system? And then we also can ask, what about the cities that have shown that they could do it, that they had a plan, and over 20 or 30 years, over a few growth cycles, they were able to actually transform themselves with some intent? What did they do that was different from most of us, where we have plans and we feel at the end of it all that it's more or less, it was a piece of paper that we weren't quite ever able to deliver to the ground? And my answer to that is back to the old thing that I think needs to be said over and over again. What I found is the source of strategy, counterintuitively, is urbanisms. The ways in which a community of city builders co-design, co-build, co-develop, co-govern, co-locate activities so that they together, not now as individuals, the slum dweller versus the global corporation versus the local real estate speculator, that they together find a way to align their interests in the city and build some unit of the city together that has a very robust outcome for them. The urbanism is the system, and urbanism is the system that makes the city governable and shapeable. And we have to do this counterintuitively from the micro, from the local level. We not only have to design and build it together in a certain way, but it's the process, and this is very consistent with ICLEI's legacy, it's the process we put in place locally that allows us as agents